Judging a book by its cover, or what's more commonly referred to as profiling in the law enforcement world, is a big deal for all of us. If law enforcement can just look at you and say, maybe there's something going on there, and then enter your information into a large law enforcement intelligence database, which may also be used for prosecution at some point. And that's why today we're going to talk a little bit about the TxGANG Intelligence Database. Now, in this video, we're just going to do a very high-level overview of what the process looks like and what some of the laws are that apply. But remember, it's really important to know for everybody, because this could involve a situation where you're not even arrested, or maybe you don't even know that the cops are looking at you and your information still gets put into a database nonetheless. So in Texas, we have something called the TxGANG Database. It's really called the TxGANG Intelligence Database, and it's codified under Chapter 67 of the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure. And as you'll see as we go through this, there's going to be some other laws that apply. But in general, what this is a database compiled of information where law enforcement thinks potentially somebody is involved in some sort of gang activity. So they have to gather this information in certain counties of a certain population size and put it into a database that can later be used. Let's start by going over the records creation process. How does your name or information get put into this database? Now, there's a couple of different ways, but I'm going to give you kind of a little flow chart here of how it works. So it's going to start off with some sort of law enforcement contact. And during that contact, they decide you are potentially involved in some gang activity. And I keep overemphasizing the word potentially here because there doesn't necessarily have to be some sort of concrete evidence that you were involved in anything or doing anything wrong. And we look at that word potentially, and that's really where, as a defense attorney, as a defense firm, our team looks at that word and we really dissect it to make sure that there's really important things that are adhered to, like your right to privacy. There's some other federal laws that apply with your information being entered into the database. But that's kind of how it starts. So once you meet the criteria, which we'll go over in a second here, your information is put into a record, and that record is put into the TxGANG Database. It's then shared with a bunch of law enforcement agencies. Chapter 67, again, of the Code of Criminal Procedure outlines what those agencies are, what they're doing, what their roles are. Now, a couple of important things about Chapter 67. It does create this database, and it uses the word shall quite a bit. So that means law enforcement actually has to do this. It's compulsory in a lot of cases. And you can read into the size of the county that this would apply to, or the size of the municipality the law enforcement agency is working in, that would create that requirement for them to make this record of you. Now, the other thing that's really interesting about the legislation itself in Chapter 67 is that it also mandates some federal training that these law enforcement agencies have to go through to make sure that they are putting the right information in there, and that they're actually putting things in there that meet the criteria of the gang database under something called 28 CFR, that's Code of Federal Regulations, Part 23. So now I'm going to go over some of the requirements for being put into the TxGANG Database. And this is a long list, folks. So I have a piece of paper in front of me. I have it broken down into the very specific things that could potentially get somebody put in there. And these are really important to know. So requirements for actually being put into the gang database, the law enforcement agency must find some of these things, okay? So if one of these two things applies, that could result in entry into the TxGANG Database. So the first is a judicial finding that includes as part of the criminal offense that the individual's participation is in a criminal street gang. The second would be judicial self-admission by an individual of criminal street gang membership. So really practical examples of these. Typically, these two are going to involve an arrest. So you would know that your information is going to be put in there. The first one, a judicial finding about the criminal offense. So think about getting charged. Maybe there's some probable cause, some warrants issued, either for search or arrest. And then your information gets put in there because there's that judicial finding. The second is probably more important, and a practical example of this would be somebody questioning you, a law enforcement agency questioning you, or an informant questioning you, and you saying, yes, I belong to insert the organization which they assume, again, is some sort of gang, or there's some sort of gang-related activity going on with that organization. So if you meet either one of those, then your information can be put in. Now, we're gonna get into the more nascent, sort of gray area stuff where you have to meet a couple different pieces of criteria to potentially be put into the TxGANG database. So, I'm gonna read off this list of different criteria that potentially, if you meet, you'll be put in there. And you have to meet 2 of these pieces of criteria. The first is non-judicial self-admission by an individual of a criminal street gang member. Of criminal street gang membership. So think about this, probably goes back more to the informant stuff. Maybe you don't know that they're an informant. Maybe you're out there and maybe you post on social media or something that you are part of a certain organization, and that potentially meets that one piece of criteria. The second is identification of the individual as a criminal street gang member by a reliable informant or other individual. So now we're talking, okay, police have somebody out there, they're just kind of observing, and they can identify you. And they use the word credible, as a practical matter. I think credibility, it's kind of a loosely used term that's thrown around out there, but nonetheless, that is potentially a piece of criteria that if you meet, you can be put in there. The third is identification of the individual as a criminal street gang member by a reliable informant or other individual and corroborated by an informant or other individual of unknown reliability. So you can kind of see the issues there. Now we're saying, okay, well, you're identified by an informant, and it kind of goes against that last piece by saying, and there's an additional person that identifies you regardless of their credibility. So now we're starting to get more and more gray, more and more nascent, probably more and more to the point where you're not even going to know that your information is entered. The fourth is evidence that the individual uses in more than an incidental manner criminal street gang dress, hand signals, tattoos, or symbols that are associated with the criminal street gang that operates in an area frequented by the individual. So now, this one is kind of fraught with problems because maybe there's an organization that's viewed as some sort of criminal street gang, but they're not doing a lot of stuff. We run into this a lot. I have a lot of friends that are in motorcycle clubs, a lot of people that are bikers, and a lot of them get this bad reputation as this kind of sons of anarchy group, but they're really not. In fact, a lot of them do some really good work out there in the community. Here in El Paso, our local coalition does a lot of charity work. A lot of the clubs actually donate to really good causes. They do a toy run. So it becomes problematic because you get labeled right away, and you're essentially the book that gets judged based on the cover without much more going into it. We've also had cases where cops just assume a lot, and they don't know that, like if I didn't have friends in this world, I wouldn't know about the different cuts, the different clubs and stuff like that and what they're doing, but they just kind of lump everybody into the same bucket. Fifth piece of criteria. Evidence that the individual has been arrested or taken into custody with known criminal street gang members for an offense or conduct consistent with criminal street gang activity. Again, we're slapping these big labels on there. There are some definitions in both the Texas Penal Code and the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure that can kind of help us shape this, but a lot of this is sort of an on-the-spot assessment or some sort of law enforcement assessment, and they're just kind of trying to interpret as best they can what is going on out there. Sixth piece of criteria. Evidence that the individual uses technology, including the internet, to recruit new criminal street gang members. So think about this. Let me give you a practical example. Again, going back to the motorcycle club world, maybe you host an event and your club says, hey, everybody come on out, we're looking for new members. Well, if you're unknowingly already identified as a criminal street gang, that could be problematic, and that could lead to falling under this piece of criteria, which again is in a very gray area. Number 7, evidence that the individual frequents a documented area of criminal street gangs and associates with known criminal street gang members. Guys, you can see how problematic that can be. In my mind, when I read that, it really feels like guilt by association. So just based on where you hang out, maybe you have certain friends that do things that are in clubs, maybe that are considered criminal street gangs, again, without this high evidentiary standard or burden, that can be problematic. In fact, there's cases that happened right here in El Paso, Texas, where somebody was put into the database, and those cases, some of them are being litigated right now, unknowingly because they attended things like funerals or gatherings. So just keep that in mind. And number 8 is evidence that the individual has visited a known criminal street gang member other than a family member of the individual while the individual is confined or committed in a penal institution. So now we're looking at people who you've had contact with, and this is in a sort of a confinement facility scenario. So they're gonna have documented the names of people that come in that have any contact with anyone. And again, it becomes problematic because each of these pieces of criteria is built on a bunch of assumptions. And when you start really drilling down into it to see what can be verified, what can't be verified, it becomes really problematic. And probably, the most important thing to realize here is that this is not something where you receive traditional notice, as we would say in the law. So you're not going to get a letter or anything like that to your house typically, unless there's an arrest or something like that involved. And even then you may not get notice of being entered into the TxGANG Database. But we're really talking about situations where you're lumped into this system and your information could potentially be used later on for a prosecution. And I know, I've probably repeated myself a bunch of times, but that becomes problematic because now we're dealing with people's civil rights and their right to privacy and just their being able to associate with people. Freedom of speech, big one here, because if you're wearing certain things with certain organizations on them, could that lead you to being entered into the TxGANG Database? Well, potentially. If you go to certain gatherings, could that happen? Well, potentially. And so it's very, from a defense standpoint, it's very problematic that we have all of these assumptions built in. So let's talk a little bit about the important stuff here. So how would you find out if you are in the TxGANG Database? The primary way to find out is through an open records request to the government. We're gonna post some links down below, by the way, with the applicable law and the link where you can actually go to do an open records request to the government to see if your information has been entered into the TxGANG Database. But really, that's the primary way that you find out. And there are other collateral consequences for being entered into the TxGANG Database, which, in a lot of ways, it sort of makes it easier for prosecutors to make further assumptions. You think about the typical assistant DA, by the way, a lot of whom are out there trying to do the best they can, but they have these really big caseloads, and they're just kind of going off of the information that they get from law enforcement. And again, this video is not meant to slam law enforcement or say that everybody is out there doing a bad job. I think most cops and law enforcement are out there doing a great job, but there are a few bad apples. And when you're trained in a certain way to identify somebody based on how they look, and you're constantly told, okay, this is bad, we have to get them into the intelligence database, that could be potentially problematic. I spent 17 years in the military, and it's kind of no different there. You're trained a certain way when you deploy to identify issues. When you're out there, maybe it's based on how somebody dresses, they're affiliated with a certain organization. So you're kind of on high alert, or maybe you have to take different actions. So this isn't meant to demonize anybody. This is really meant so that people have a better understanding of what this legislation is. Maybe it's time to change the legislation, but nonetheless, you need to know this because I think this is a big civil rights issue that a lot of people are running into, again, unknowingly, and then those collateral consequences come into play. So we're going to be doing a couple other videos and really drilling down into specifics. We'll go over how you actually fill out the form for the open records request, how you would be able to contest your name being in the TxGANG Database, what are some of the specific collateral consequences. But here's what you need to know in summary. Know that the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, Chapter 67, covers all of this. There is an audit report that was done a little over a year ago showing that some of the names that were in the database, in fact, a lot of the names and a lot of the people and the information were in there, did not comply with the CFR that I spoke about earlier, which will be linked below. And you need to know that there is a way for you to verify whether or not you're in there. Remember what the criteria is, so rewind and go over the criteria if you need to. And just remember that there is a way to contest your name being in that database and to be proactive about your legal health. If you have any questions, go to our website, submit a contact form, send us an email, give us a call. We're here to help. And more than anything, we're here to produce these videos that educate you about your legal health and sort of what's going on out there so that you can be more proactive and understand the world a little bit better, at least from a legal perspective.